Welcome to Bedcrime Stories Podcast. I'm your host, T. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to say thanks for my videos, please head over to Bedcrime Stories on YouTube and get yourself a membership. Also, you can help by having your friends and family subscribe to the channel. With that out of the way, let's get started. Sebastian Wayne Drake Rogers has been missing since late February of 2024. His biological father, Seth Rogers, continues to advocate for him. His mother and stepfather, Chris and Katie Proudfoot, are mostly silent. Over time, I've noticed contradictions in things that Chris Proudfoot says and does. In today's video, I want to share these contradictions with you because I think they illustrate that Mr. Proudfoot is not someone we can fully believe. Let's get started. In some of Chris's early interviews, Chris spoke for Katie and he used the terms the mother and the child and the young man to refer to them. He was also very quick to say that he wasn't home in Hendersonville when Sebastian vanished. This took him out of the scenario. By using terms like the child, the mother, the young man, in my opinion, Chris Proudfoot gives himself away as a man who is not very close to Sebastian. He talks about Sebastian as if he's some random child in the third person. This basically points to no feelings, no emotion toward Sebastian, and that's a red flag. But then Chris adapted his verbiage in subsequent videos, likely based on negative comments he was hearing on social media. Then he began referring to Sebastian as our son. To me, that's disingenuous. 2, Chris came out at one point to say that he, as Katie's husband, needed to protect her. And yet, when we heard about his fourth wife, Nina Gomez's experiences with him, Chris came across as a quick-to-temper guy who initially wooed Nina, but then pulled a Jekyll and Hyde on her by allegedly cheating and enlisting his family to take possession over their child, Faith. If we are to believe Nina's side of the story, then Chris Proudfoot, as her husband, failed to protect her 2 children from a previous marriage, and baby Faith. Remember, it was baby Faith who was in the car seat carrier that Nina said Chris threw on a coffee table with the baby in it. And speaking of Faith, Nina Gomez said that when Chris found out she was pregnant, he allegedly told her that she should end the pregnancy. So per Nina, Chris did not want that baby, at least initially. So why then did Chris, backed up by the presence of his mother, his sister, and his stepfather, try to take full custody of Faith? One minute, he doesn't even want the baby to be born, and in the next minute, he wants to take control over that baby and take it away from the baby's mother, Nina Gomez, who wanted that child from the very beginning. 3, Chris told Nancy Grace that he would take a polygraph if she set it up. Nancy Grace quickly set it up, and she made it for in the area where Chris said he was working, so it was very convenient. But then Chris did not take the polygraph. And he explained this by saying that the TBI told him not to take it. How convenient to blame his failure to fulfill his promise to Nancy Grace on another entity. 4, Chris Proudfoot, in his interview with Duchess, the first interview, he said that he, Katie, and the father, Seth Rogers, had a great working relationship with each other. They openly discussed Sebastian, and they had a very effective co-parenting relationship. Well, we later found out that Chris and Katie were keeping secrets from Seth. Seth was very surprised to hear about the many CPS reports that were directed to the Proudfoot home. Clearly, Seth was not fully aware of what was going on in that home with his son. In addition, Seth said that right after Sebastian went missing, there was a 2-week period where Katie and Chris refused to speak to him. That's not being open. That's not having an effective relationship. Why did they refuse to speak to Seth? 5. Chris and Katie have said in at least one interview that they can't wait for Sebastian to come home to his Hendersonville neighborhood. And yet, we learned from Seth Rogers that starting in 2022, Katie and Chris were trying to get him, Seth, to take over full-time care of Sebastian. And the Proudfoots also mentioned that they were thinking of putting Sebastian into a boys' school away from home. It's a total contradiction to say 1 minute that you can't wait for your son to get home and he's going to have so many friends when he gets there. And then we find out that you guys were actually trying to get him out of your home and into Seth's home full time. Contradiction equals red flag. And I'll add that they actually moved out of the home that Sebastian, you would think, would return to if he really was missing and he wanted to get back home. They left that home and moved into an RV that was many miles away from the home. Moving on to another topic. Ever notice how when Seth Rogers talks about his son, Sebastian, he mentions all the activities that he and Sebastian did together, and he says things like, 1, going to gaming events offered my son opportunities for socialization. Playing Magic the Navigator helped Sebastian with his reading and math skills. I haven't heard that stuff out of Chris and Katie Proudfoot. Seth saying that shows a real interest in helping his son hone the skills that he'll need to be successful. Reading, math. You may recall that Chris actually had Sebastian referring to him and calling him Mr. Chris, a moniker that illustrates a distance and formality. It does not illustrate a warm and close bond. Chris also used the word goofy to describe Sebastian's smile. He also mocked him as being sort of a sissy for liking things like sushi, and he allegedly used his power washer on Sebastian. In addition, he made Sebastian wear diapers to school and at home. I would call that cruel and unusual punishment for a 15-year-old. Now, where Chris and Katie seem to mock Sebastian, Seth seems to embrace his child's quirks and uniqueness. No one is going to convince me that Seth Rogers didn't love his son or that he had something to do with Sebastian's disappearance. It's painfully obvious which parent is heartbroken and devastated and which parent wants Sebastian found and back. Maybe Seth Rogers is rough around the edges in some ways. Maybe he's made mistakes in the past, but he does have a big heart when it comes to his son, Sebastian. Seth mentioned in the Lore Lodge interview that Sebastian knew all of his Clarksville neighbors, and Sebastian also knew the lady at the deli who sliced the lunch meat just right. Seth finds it strange that Sebastian didn't have any friends in his Hendersonville neighborhood, and that he asked his mother and stepfather for friends for Christmas. According to Seth, Sebastian asked him for a road trip to see his paternal grandparents. Those would be Seth's parents. That's what Sebastian wanted from his dad for Christmas. What does that say? According to Seth, Sebastian never ever did anything to harm another child. Not any child. Nobody at school, and certainly not his young sister, Faith. Seth explained that he taught Sebastian that men are supposed to be protectors. Seth feels that if Sebastian tried to run away, he would have headed toward his Clarksville house. And according to Seth, Sebastian did have a pretty good idea of how to get there, even though it would have been an extremely long journey on foot. Seth also reiterated, I've heard him say this before, that Sebastian would never ever get into a vehicle with a stranger. So it sounds like Sebastian would not have gotten into a vehicle with a stranger unless he was forced to. Seth also said that Sebastian was a kid who was always cold. He said he wore a hoodie in the living room even when the temperature inside was in the 70s. Sebastian did not like to be cold. And we can tell that he was a very thin child. Would a child like that, even if the temperatures outside were in the low 50s on the night he vanished, would he have walked out barefoot in only workout pants and a long-sleeve t-shirt, without a coat, without shoes, without his phone? The only way that would happen, according to Seth, would be if he had to run for his life. Sadly, I don't believe Sebastian left that house on foot. I pray he's alive and well, but I see no good reason for Chris and Katie Proudfoot to take him somewhere to a safe location to hide him for a period. I just don't buy into that. I don't know if you guys follow the JonBenét case, but in that case, we heard that JonBenét had a problem with bedwetting. Also, when her body was found, there were signs of SA. Now, in thinking about Sebastian, he also, according to Chris and Katie Proudfoot, had a bedwetting problem. So the question is, did Sebastian sustain SA in his home? His mother, Katie Proudfoot, had been SA'd as a child, allegedly, by her own mother. So that is a concern. I'm also wondering, as I think about JonBenét, who had a major skull fracture when her body was found, could it be that Sebastian sustained a skull fracture like JonBenét? Could it have been an accident? And could the thud that Katie said she heard around 10 p.m. have been when that happened? They would not want to report such an incident because of all the CPS reports, allegedly, that had been directed to their home. This could still be an accident scenario that Katie and Chris simply did not want to report. I think of Summer Wells. I feel like her situation might be down to something like that. And could that explain the very long phone call that Chris and Katie had that night? Did she call him saying, "Oh my God, there's been an accident. What am I gonna do?" And is that what they were planning as they had that very long, something like 3-hour phone call? It's a possibility, in my opinion. And now I want to throw in something kind of random. But remember SF Investigates? He was also on the Lore Lodge for an interview, and he said that so far he's seen no signs of foul play when it comes to Sebastian's disappearance. But he also said that he saw a figure in dark clothes on security camera footage in Sebastian's neighborhood on the night Sebastian went missing. And so far, nobody has been able to identify that person. Isn't that a potential sign of foul play? Wouldn't you question that and say, something doesn't seem right? I don't understand how he can just say, we don't know who this person is, but we don't see any signs of foul play. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time on Bed Crime Stories. Love you guys.